Hi, and welcome to According to Weeze, the podcast. With me, your girl Weeze. This is a show where we're going to have candid conversations with the hopes of finding a way forward in community. See, fundamentally, I believe that we exist at the intersection of our complex identities, politics, and our sociocultural systems. And let's be real, the only way to dismantle it all is to dissect it. So get cozy, get comfy, and let's dive in. All right, y'all, we are back again, and I am so excited that my boo is here to talk to us. So y'all, if y'all are new to me, you don't know this. If you are not new to me, you may have heard about a lovely little group that I'm a part of. We call ourselves the Trinity. And I have one of the other Trinity members here today. And you'll end up hearing from both of them, I think, actually in consecutive weeks, but that's neither here nor there. But my boo Lettie is here to talk to us today. Hi, boo.
Hey, I'm very excited.
I know. I love when we get to like do things together. Somebody actually asked me the other day, they were like, is your Trinity doing anything together soon? And I was like, well, we started this conversation like 3 weeks ago, but the way everyone's lives are set up right now,
Right.
we even have trouble. Like, it'll be like one of us will text, and then like 2 days later it'll be like, oh damn,
Yep.
life happened, but let's just pick up this conversation right
Yep.
right where we left it.
Like a weekly
Yeah.
thing now.
It'll be like, damn, y'all, sorry, that one was on me. You're right. And it'll be like, oh, are we like, let's have a Zoom date on Monday, but then Monday comes and goes, and one of us is like, damn, I didn't check my text messages.
Yep. And then it's like, oh, Thursday. Oh, y'all, dang, I missed this. It really did. Like, it's just
We're trying. It is. But, I think we have the benefit of one, because we all do this work, like we understand what is going on for folks that are in the like activism, organizing, anti-racism lane right now. And so it's like, it's like we just get it. We get it. So it
yeah,
makes it really easy. It's nice. Because you don't have to do that thing where you're like, oh, but this happened and oh, I'm so swamped and like,
right. We just get it.
right.
Like we don't have to say anything. We just understand.
Right, exactly. But for the people that are that have been sleeping under rocks that don't know who you are, Lettie, tell the people about yourselves,
So
because there's many of you, just one of you,
yeah,
yourself that does many things.
all the things. Yeah. I'm a historian. I'm an anti-racism educator, podcast host. I got my master's in history in 2015. I just finished my second master's in conflict management this year. Shout out to student loan debt because honestly, that's my life. And because I mean, you got to have the paper to do the work,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're walking around here like a white male who can get anything. So there's that.
Facts.
Um, yeah, and I started my podcast last year. I love it. Talk about history, social issues, all the things. I really involved here in the Southeastern North Carolina area, especially in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm on a few boards, do racial justice work. I'm always on a panel somewhere.
Facts.
And yeah, I'm a Black woman in America trying to make it.
Mm,
I say that in the most real and authentic way possible because it's really easy to get on here and say things and try to make it seem like we're not real people, right? But it's
mm-hmm.
whole people out here still trying to navigate white supremacy, trying to deal with racism, and trying to just fulfill our purpose too. And so I've been really blessed to be able to do all that now. I mean, by all that, I mean, I've experienced racism my whole life. So I've been doing that.
Right.
Like, when it comes to my career and making a name for myself, like, this summer that really blew up
Mm-hmm.
with hearing about Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And we know how that went with
Mm-hmm.
that this was trendy and it's
Right.
not
Right.
because we're still doing the work. And so I'm very thankful. I have Patreon now. Yeah, it's great. Actually, that part is great. And I say that sometimes like with hesitancy
Yeah.
because it is great, right? Because this is like what I want to do,
Yep.
but it's heavy.
Yeah.
It's still heavy. Like I don't get a break. Like I'm actually like when I do history research, it's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some things about myself. So
Yeah. I think that's a really good point that we should reiterate is that we are whole ass humans
mm-hmm.
living our whole lives, right? Like we are not exempt from family drama, or I mean maybe not drama, but like, just the usual stuff that happens with like family and friends and partners and feeling the weight of the world and dealing with racism and misogyny and like all the other things. Like we are full humans just like everybody else. We are not, exempt from having the human experience, especially right now at the intersection of like just trying to live during a
Mm-hmm.
pandemic. And constantly dealing with the bittersweetness of like, oh, y'all are finally paying attention. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
finally, and I will say, I don't know if you get this, but I still have people that will argue with me regularly about like how much I charge or why I charge for certain things or, so on and so forth, which please go away. But, but,
Like that away.
right. But to go from having done this work for years and years and years
mm-hmm.
and that the only reason that you've now been able to like truly, have an income that is rooted in the work that you do, solely, not having like side hustles or bridge jobs or being on like 12 different boards or like
Right?
consulting here and there,
Yeah.
is because white folks decided to start paying attention. Like the Great White Awakening occurred because folks of color and especially Black folks like this ain't new.
Nope.
We've been
Not
talking
here.
about this and addressing it and fighting, for our lives.
No, but that's true. And that's why the question people ask, I'm like, how is this happening? Or when did this start? I'm like, where have you been?
Right.
Like, honestly, where have you been? Because
Right.
I've been black my whole life. And so, like, y'all are out here upset about George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
Companies posting pictures and all this stuff. I was like, but where's that same outrage?
Right.
All these other years.
Right.
Where's the same outrage for a century? Like,
Yeah.
where has that been?
Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, this is not just a hobby for us.
Right.
This is not a let me jump on the bandwagon. Like this is what we've been doing
Mm-hmm.
for free a lot of times too.
Most of the time.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, no, when people are like, when did this start? I'm like 1492 with Prince Henry. Go all the way back. Or then I'll be like, well, that's the most that's the most accurate date, but there are accounts that say that in 1462, and then people are like,
Yep. Yep.
I'm
Yep.
uncomfortable now.
Yes. Yes. People have this whitewashed version of history.
Yeah.
They're like, no, but like when did this stuff start? I'm
Right.
like, when I just said.
Right. Like I said.
Like I just you want me to tell you examples? Like honestly, like the other day, after we found out about last week about Breonna Taylor,
Mm-hmm.
I saw all these questions like, but how is this possible? Like, how did a police officer not get charged? How? And I'm like, what do you mean how? And if
Right.
you're really asking how,
Mm-hmm.
you have not been paying
Paying
attention
attention.
to
Yeah.
anything. I mean, how the system was working the way it was meant to work.
Right.
It's supposed to work this way.
Yeah. This is by design, intentionally.
Intentionally, and you can read it for yourself.
Right.
And you can read it. There's sources for that. Primary sources, documents.
Everywhere. Which is a perfect segue into what we're talking about today. So obviously police and policing is a huge part of the, conversation when it comes to reform and equity and justice and dismantling racism. Now, we would be remiss if we were not explicit in saying that it is only a part of the full system. And the reason that it feels like the most important part for people to go after right now is because it is the one that is most visibly harming, killing, murdering folks of color and expressly Black folks. But let us not get it twisted. The healthcare system, the education system, housing, banking, like every other part of our society is also killing folks with marginalized identities.
Yes.
differently and slower, but it's not just about the police, right? But
Right.
today, however, and also, that's what we're talking about because,
Right.
obviously the conversation right now, a lot of people say defund the police or abolish the police because they don't necessarily understand the larger context. We're talking about restructuring and reimagining public safety. When we say defund the police, we're not saying don't put money into public safety. We're saying there needs to be a reallocation of funds because the funds that are being provided to police are being misappropriated specifically in ways that allow them to hypermilitarize, right? Like
Right.
so on and so forth,
Right.
and continue to terrorize communities of color, da 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 da. But in order to understand why the culture of policing is the way it is, I wanted to have a really honest conversation about the fact that it is rooted in the slave patrol, that the evolution of policing as we currently understand it and know it is rooted in the slave patrol. Now,
Yeah.
before I kick it off to Lettie, because she is a historian and this is her lane, I want to say one thing because the Fox News counter narrative pushback is always, but there are other countries that have police. We cannot blame. I wish y'all could see Lettie's face right now. We cannot blame American policing on slave patrols. Like that is an inaccurate statement to make. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Words mean things. Let's be clear. Other countries have public safety systems. Other countries, especially European countries, have appropriate response units for mental health crises, for, domestic assault, for, physical sexual assault, so on and so forth. The police, as we understand it, do not respond to every little single thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and AOC said it really well, I think, in a tweet, or when she was like, people keep asking me like, what would it look like? And the perfect example we have, like, thankfully we have the perfect example of the suburbs because civil services are being funded properly. And what we know is that when civil services, from paved streets to proper education, right, when
Yeah.
people's basic needs are met, when civil services are being properly funded, that we have a reduction in crime and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
So let us be clear. The institution of policing in the United States is nothing like the public safety systems in other countries, even countries that are, of people of color, because that's the other argument. Like, oh, so there's no police in countries where they're predominantly like it's predominantly people of color. There are public safety systems,
Right.
and we're not
Yeah.
saying
Like,
that those
why
are
do
well
people?
done or perfect either.
Right. And people say that, and I'm like, okay, no one's talking about other countries.
Right.
Why are you all up in Europe? Why are you all up in, like, why are you in a whole other continent? Why we are talking about America
Mm-hmm.
because y'all want to talk about America with your little rights and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to talk about America with this conversation because it's much easier to deflect
Yes.
because you don't want to deal with the truth. Like, you don't want to talk about that.
Right. Because then folks are forced to have to reconcile their identity and how their identity is linked to the human trafficking, enslavement, and
Yes.
and mass. I call it it's a mass genocide. Like let's not use coded language, and like mass genocide and dehumanization of enslaved Africans.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
y'all don't want to have that conversation, but we're about to. So
Yes, we are.
let us start at the beginning. So let's first frame it. Why do people say from slave patrol to policing? Like, why, just like quickly, what is the correlation? And then I'm gonna let you do the Lettie thing where y'all are in for a treat, where she's just gonna go from the beginning to the end.
Yeah. So, I mean, because because slave patrols, like, that's who the police were. But also, and we talk about the definition of the word policing, right? We have to understand where public order comes into that, where law and order come into that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but people often want to say slave patrols to policing because that fits into the context of how Black people and brown people have always been treated. Black people, especially in this country, because there are laws that were written for us to remain tame. Now, I say that with like quotes,
Mm-hmm.
and to keep us enslaved even after enslavement was deemed illegal. But I'm going to get into that some more with all of the other stuff because there's a whole timeline that we can go into, because people don't understand and don't want to understand, I think, what we mean by slave patrols to policing, because anytime you say the word slave, white America, super defensive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, but I have family members that are police, and they weren't. And I'm like, no one is talking about your brother, cousin, daughter, mama, sister, daddy. Ain't nobody talking about them. We're
Yeah.
not talking about them as an individual. We're talking about the institution of it and where it originated from and what system,
Right.
and like of brutality it originated from. Right. So
yeah, I said that on the last episode. I was like, y'all swear, because people swear I hate the police. I get emails from people just going on and on about how much I hate the police. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. I hate the institution of policing. One of the reasons you don't hear me say, quote unquote, a cab, like all cops are bastards, is not because I don't believe in the like, men are trash, don't say all men, but because I understand that for this particular conversation, it's really hard when the second that you say that for people to actually listen to you. Because they think of their brothers or their sisters or their cousins or their, you know, non-binary loved ones that are in policing. Actually, I don't even know if policing would actually allow non-binary folks. Whatever. Policing is, the whole institution is a good old boys white club. So cis-het upholds all the mainstream identities. I try to be more inclusive in my languaging than the police actually are. Anyways, neither here nor there. Right. But like my point is to say, you know, so that's like a personal choice for me as an educator. But the sentiment still holds. Like last week I had Mario on. Y'all heard me talk. Like, I love that man. You know, that's my big brother. Like, I love him like a real, it's my chosen family, but I love him like a real brother. And he was a police officer up until a couple years ago. I don't look at him and I'm like, I hate you and you're a trash ass human. And nah. But I can still look at him and say the institution of policing is vile and da 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 da. And in fact, he happens to agree. But right, like, let's be very clear. It's the same way that when we say men are trash, right? We're not saying all individual men are toxic and so on and so forth and abusive. We're saying that the system of masculine, like patriarchy, that allows for masculinity to be weaponized in the ways that it is against women and non-binary folk, is trash. So let's also get that out of the way. All right. So that being said, tell the folks what slave patrols were so that they can get a full grasp on this.
Yeah. So actually, before I get into that,
yes,
I'm going to start because this is what I want people. I want people to make this connection in a few minutes. So yes, police did originate as slave patrols in southern colonies, right? So the first slave patrols originated in the Carolina colonies in 1704. We call them Carolina colonies because at the time, if you know anything about history and how the United States, which weren't even the United States yet, okay, were structured like geographically, that's what they were called, was just the colonies, right? And so what happened though, like everything else in our country, a lot of things we took from England. So the development of policing in the United States closely followed the development of policing in England, right? So you have these northern cities. Boston created their first night watch in 1636, New York in 1658, Philly in 1700. And so the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I have people say this to me, right? Like, oh, but this is actually where police come from. They come from northern cities. There was no enslavement, right? And I'm like, right. We're going to get to that. Because see, whenever you had Black people who were freed enslaved people going up north, and even during the Great Migration, this same system became focused on crime. We want to stereotype with who was deemed criminal. Okay. I'm going to get to all that.
Yeah, no, that's good groundwork to lay now, so that when we get there, people can understand how, because crime was defined very specifically. Yeah, we'll get there. Yes,
right. So then you have in southern states, or southern colonies, you started having slave patrols in 1704, and slave patrols have three primary functions. Number one was to chase down, apprehend, and return to their owners runaway slaves. I don't use the word slave, but I'm using it because I got this from a primary source document. I say enslaved people.
Mm-hmm.
I that on your podcast.
Yeah.
So using that word, I'm reading off of something else. Second function, to provide a form of organized terror to deter slave revolts.
Mm-hmm.
And number three, to maintain a form of discipline for slave workers who were subject to summary justice outside of the law if they violated any plantation rules.
Mm-hmm.
What does that sound like? Oh, it sounds like you're trying to tame people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it sounds like you're trying to purposely hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
That was your job.
Yeah.
That was your job, was to brutalize
Mm-hmm.
enslaved people. That was your job, to torture,
Mm-hmm.
to mutilate. You had okay.
To
Now,
hunt.
yes.
So if somebody's running away and you need to make sure that you catch them by any means necessary,
yes.
aka shooting people in the back.
Exactly. Oh, is that 2020?
Oh, was it yesterday? Oh, okay.
So then also during the Civil War, because people don't want to talk about the military, right? How the military has always been this big, like, you should pay respect and all this stuff, right? Well, during the Civil War, you had white men in the military who were the primary form of law enforcement in the South, but law enforcement were slave patrols.
Mm-hmm.
So you fighting to keep enslavement while also being the ones who are, number one, already seceded from the Union, so you're not even part of the country anymore. And number two, you're going around stealing things from people's homes and doing it in the name of law enforcement, and you're brutalizing, murdering, raping Black men, women, and children.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that part out. And then during Reconstruction, right, which is after the Civil War, you had these vigilante style organizations start to evolve in modern, what we would call modern day Southern police departments.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me just paint a picture that these were not uniformed policemen.
Mm-hmm.
These were deputized random white men out here in the streets that decided they're going to try to take the law into their own hands. Cue Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yep.
Cue all of these white power, white nationalist organizations that we see today, right? This is it's not the same per se, right? But it rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
It rhymes with history. And so you had these vigilante style groups who wanted to control freed enslaved people.
Yep.
Who were now sharecroppers, who already couldn't do anything, who were basically living in enslavement again, just not quote unquote legally. And these same vigilante style groups are enforcing Jim Crow laws.
Mm-hmm.
And just even before Jim Crow laws became Jim Crow laws, these were just laws in the country, the whole country, not just the South. And so they were denying free Black people equal rights. They were denying us anything. And again, these were police.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so whenever you think about that, that's the institution that police were founded on. Now, people are probably thinking, right? Like, oh, but what about northern states?
Yep.
What about those states, right? Well, also a conversation with police, you have to understand what public disorder meant during the time. So during the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, you had cities beginning to grow up north. Definitely started happening around the 1880s, 1890s with immigrants coming from European countries. Mm-hmm. Well, you also had public drunkenness, you had prostitution, you had all of these things that society deemed morally wrong, right? So that was public disorder. And so police were supposed to help control that. Mm-hmm. Well, then that easily became this response, right, to crime and what crime was. And so you're probably thinking, oh, well, that could have been white people. That could have been anyone. Yeah, you're right. But see, you got to bring in the racist stereotypes. that America put on Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever you read things, right, because people can easily go read and see, oh, but they were policing immigrants who were from Germany, who were from, right, but see, they all can assimilate into whiteness
Mm-hmm.
because their skin color.
Mm-hmm.
So also like a lot more goes into this too with who these companies, right, who deem people as disorderly and dangerous people.
Mm-hmm.
So people who were trying to form unions, who wanted to stand up to bosses who weren't paying them fairly, right? So this was all considered public disorder. And so you start to have in the early 1900s, matter of fact, Calvin Coolidge, whenever he was governor, senator, forget, of Massachusetts, he's the first one who had law and order in a speech. And people put it on Nixon, right? But I'm like, nah, actually Coolidge said it first. Because think about what was happening in America. You had Black people fleeing the South,
Mm-hmm.
going to these northern cities, right? Fleeing all kinds of things. People can Google all that if they want to and need to. But what's important to understand is how the language of dangerous people, criminals, right, came associated with Black people. And that's where people don't connect the dots.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's easy to say, oh, but that's not how it was in the North. No, 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 no. You still had Black people in the North.
Mm-hmm.
And so the same mentality that was across the entire country about my ancestors became a thing of, oh, well, they got to be controlled.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, what can we say is criminal? And so it basically became like these people who were dangerous people were those who were biologically inferior. Now, people that fall into that category could have been immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
sure. But whenever it comes to biologically inferior, y'all have to think about this in terms of the fact that science, I put that also in quotes, said that we already as Black people were inferior.
Yep.
Biologically inferior. Imagine what happened whenever the United States was like, oh shoot, all these Black people are free now.
Yeah.
Oh, what are we going to do?
Yep.
We can't have them out here running around. What can we do? Oh, we already have a system set up. Oh, well, we can take certain words and put them in these laws, and it won't seem like we're being discriminatory against them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Laws like unskilled, uneducated class,
Mm-hmm.
biologically inferior, morally intemperate.
Mm-hmm.
All of these words, right? So yes, did this also apply to people who were not Black? Yes, it did. But like we say today, disproportionately, Black people were more affected.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Like absolutely. There's facts that might show all that. And so again, ask yourself who was associated with crime. So yeah, that was like a very concise overview.
Yeah, and I love that you can do that. But I really want to like pick up on a few points that I like. People can't miss this, right? The roots of the slave patrol, or the roots of policing, the reason that we say it's in the slave patrol, right? You named its three purposes.
Mm-hmm.
We also named the fact that random ass white men who, and let's be clear, and Mario said this last week, up until, first of all, through most of the 20th century, there were no actual like training or training rubric for policing. That is a very new thing, a new process. And in most places, it's minimal at best. Mm-hmm. It's like 12 to 26 weeks, depending on where you are in the country. You can't even do someone's nails.
I was just
learn to do somebody's nails and get licensed to do someone's nails in 26 weeks. You know what I mean? Like, mm-hmm. But you can carry a gun. Anyways. But these were made up of, to be clear, volunteers, white male volunteers who were deputized by, right, like mayors of particular towns, right? Well, parishes, depending on where you were in the country, like, but the region, were deputized to literally hunt people, to use any sort of excessive force necessary to quote unquote keep people in line, and that it was 100% at their own bias and decision as to what that looked like. So there were no checks and balances on them. There were no repercussions. There was no definite, and we say excessive force because to us it's dehumanizing and people are dying. It's excessive force. To them it was, I mean, I get to do what I want to do. Cue Ahmaud Arbery, right?
Yeah.
So even though, to your point, Jim Crow laws are quote unquote, illegal now. Now they're just laws, right? You fast forward to 2020 and you have, Travis and Gregory McMichael who decide that this particular Black man is not allowed to be in a white neighborhood. And so they take the quote unquote take the law into their own hands. But the white men have always been the law. Their decision making has always been the law. Vigilantism is by definition part of the roots of the slave patrol.
Yes.
Those two things are inextricably linked.
Yeah. And then with that, and I didn't even mention this, I'm glad that you said this, but also with that, whenever Black people were being lynched for just being Black, right? One question I get a lot is, well, where were the police? They were there helping.
Yeah. What do you mean?
That question always makes me like scoff, right? And it's because I'm just like, what do you mean, where were they? They were right there. They were right there because people, whenever they think about their family members as cops who would never do that, I need to be able to stop with that because that's a very dangerous mentality because then they're not taking in the entire history of the fact that racial terror was all across this country, was sheriffs, lawyers, judges, storekeepers, whoever it was, police officers, police who were part of the Klan.
Yeah.
Like
most police were part of the Klan.
Girl, right. And I'm like, who do y'all think they were? Who do y'all just think that, like, what is going on in your brain?
Yeah.
And it's just that kind of stuff too, right? Like that was policing. Like, right? And that's what that institution was founded on.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I want to draw another parallel, right? If you were part of the slave patrol, aka a white vigilante, aka a random ass deputized white dude that just got to enact, his hatred on Black folks, you could also forcefully enter folks' home, regardless of race or ethnicity, based solely on the fact that you thought that they might have been sheltering escaped enslaved folks.
Right.
What's that sound like? A no-knock warrant?
Oh, sure does.
Right? What's that sound like? Wanton endangerment, only if you happen to shoot through and destroy a little bit of plaster in the homes, right? Public destruction of white property. That's a problem.
No, absolutely. And that in Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, she talks about how the Supreme Court eviscerated the entire Fourth Amendment. And people that want to talk about amendment rights and the Constitution, I'm like, y'all do know that there was an entire amendment, the Fourth Amendment, right, that protected against unreasonable search and seizure. I know it's an entire amendment, right? And so what happened though over time is they just got rid of that.
Yep.
Because of this enforcement of law and order. Whenever it actually heightened after enslavement was over.
Yep. I think that's also something that people miss. Like, slave patrols started in 1704. And the level of racial terror did actually, I mean, and let me preface this. It was always despicable and dehumanizing and absolutely fucking morally corrupt. But the rate at which it occurred increased.
Right.
And I still, we'll pretend that slavery was actually over. We'll pretend that is in fact the case for the sake of this conversation. The enslavement of Black folks as we knew it at that time ended. And the rate at which racial terror increased was astronomical.
Yes.
And the police were not doing a thing but standing there, keying it up, getting their lynching mementos. And from the accounts I read, Lettie, please correct me if I'm wrong, if they were doing any policing, it was actually to do crowd control if abolitionists showed
Yeah.
up, or
Mhm.
basically anyone that was, trying to save whichever particular Black person was about to be lynched, or, like any sort of civil unrest that was basically challenging the system. Then
Yes.
they had no problem policing.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. No, that is right. No, that is absolutely right. And actually, you had said for the sake of this conversation, we're not getting in this, but actually, I'm gonna go back for just a second
Okay.
because I want people to also understand this, right? Whenever we talk about convict policing and we talk about like that topic, right? People just think of it as, oh, okay, like chain gangs. People think of Black men, Black women being arrested for something they didn't do, and that's it. But what people neglect to also include in that conversation are conversations about labor camps,
Yep.
where
Speak on it.
it was basically enslavement all over again in a whole different, beyond gruesome level.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have just some police officer, some Klan member, some random white man, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could have him standing in front of a store. Matter of fact, Douglas Blackman's book, Slavery by Another Name,
Mm-hmm.
talks about this.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a Black man who's going to work, walking down the road, minding his business,
Mm-hmm.
going to work. A white man sees him, and because the white man wants to make some money, he says, "Oh, he that N word," because he would say that,
Mm-hmm.
stole $7.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the Black man's like, "Yo, what do you?" And I mean, the Black man can't say anything back
Right.
because then he could possibly die, right then and there. So then the white man decides that he's going to have this lie, just tell this lie, go get either a police officer, quote unquote, or some vigilante, some white man who's decided that he's going to be a cop that day, to arrest him, take him to literally a makeshift courtroom
Mm-hmm.
where there's some magistrate who knows them all, and then you have this Black man who's now been quote unquote arrested for literally doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
A white man who's about to make some money off of him
Mm-hmm.
because he's going to sell him to some rich white man who owns some company, some Tennessee Railroad company, some coal mine. And now this Black man's going to have to work off the debt that should have never even been there. A made up debt, a made up number.
Yep.
For X amount of months. You know who was there? The police
Mm-hmm.
were right there signing their reports.
Yeah.
The police right there. And that's what I think people also leave out, right? Like people have this idea of just police today, or maybe as far back as the 60s, because of the pictures that people see.
Yeah.
But I need people to understand that, like, there weren't as many cameras back in the 19th century, but that doesn't mean that this stuff still wasn't going on. And so I always like to include that, right? Because then I see people's faces changing because they're like, oh my gosh, they cops are part of that? Cops would do that? And I'm like, do y'all not see cops today? Have you ever seen a cop bust into a house and take all the stuff out of your family member's house? Because I have.
Yeah.
Have y'all never seen, like, what? This isn't a made up thing. Like this isn't just because a law is written doesn't mean people follow the law. Just because stuff's written down doesn't mean that everyone enforced it. That is literally not how it works. Y'all think somebody doesn't drink that's under 21? Like, well, I don't know.
Right. But and also, and Mario talked about this last week, a lot of laws, and this is why we keep telling y'all this is a system, and we need to actually attack the justice system. And that's why it's incredibly important to be voting at all levels, because the people that are writing the laws are writing them in such a way that, again, remember, wording is important. Lettie said this, right? The way that what words are written into law allow for enough gray area for white folks to say, oh yeah, no, but we have a law that says, you can't discriminate. No, the law says you can, though, if you can deem them disruptive, quote unquote. If you can deem, right? So we also have to be really clear. There are a whole lot of laws that are actually written. And if you, right? And again, like, you read it and you're like, oh, okay, that's what that says. But if you're not reading it with a certain level of discernment or understanding, then you're not picking up on the fact that there's like gray areas written in for loopholes, right?
Right.
Or there's enough, it's written in such a way that allows for folks, predominantly white folks, right, and police to be able to say, oh, well, as long as I say XYZ, I thought that they were brandishing a weapon. As long as I say that, then I can justify my use of using one level more excessive force than I thought the weapon that they brandish presented. Like, these laws are coded very intentionally.
Yes. No, they absolutely are. They absolutely are. And that's why whenever you start talking about like law and order and Nixon and the war on drugs and what that did for police, and
Mm-hmm.
we could get into that, but what I want people to do is read the new Jim Crow, watch 13,
Yep.
because and plus we've already talked about this so many times on both of our social media platforms. We've talked about this in lives, and I need people to understand that. So for the sake of our conversation today, I'm not going to get in far into that, but what I will say is, like, y'all, just because, right, like what, like you were saying, just because a law is written doesn't mean that there isn't gray area, right, for white people to decide what it means. Kind of like mixing and crack, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you take the word crack and you look at all, like, anything that was written at that time by his administration, any administration after that, and you replace it with black people, it makes the same sense.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the same sense. It makes the same sense because that's what that word meant. So that's why you have to draw the parallel or make the connection between that language, right, from the 19th century, saying dangerous people, right? Who was dangerous? Who was a criminal? Crack was associated with crime and criminal. Doesn't matter. And there was another form of the drug that white people did, right? Wasn't criminalized. And so then, therefore, you already have laws that are written that allow the police to then go and do whatever they want to do to you, because they've already eviscerated the Fourth Amendment. They've already taken things away from y'all, and y'all not even realizing it, and y'all still racist people that aren't for white people either. But that's another conversation. Oh my God.
You know,
like, y'all get yourselves.
And I really also want to add in that just because something is a law doesn't mean it's right. It was completely legal to lynch Black and Indigenous folks. Because let's also be clear, it wasn't just Black folks being lynched. For white folks that are listening, like, oh, this is so terrible what we do to Black people. No. Right now, this is the conversation we're having. But let us be really clear. Black, brown, Indigenous folks were all, everybody was getting lynched, right?
Yes.
It was 100% legal. In fact, sandwiches and snacks were sold at lynchings. They made them public events. So yeah, just because a law is written doesn't mean that it's not morally reprehensible.
Yeah.
Right? Like it and or dehumanizing and or completely standing in the face of like civil and human rights. So like, let's also be clear about that, because currently apparently it's legal to have concentration camps on American soil. Right? Let's be clear. So it's 2020. And, you know, not everyone that we're in community with, I should say, our circles of people, right, are having conversations about abolishing the police, defunding the police, reimagining public safety, reconstructing public safety. And I want to make sure that people understand why we're having this conversation, and like this being just like this is us unlocking the door for y'all to really start doing your own research and diving into this further around the racist roots of policing and the evolution of slave patrol and white vigilantism, right? This is why we have white militias and Kyle Rittenhouses, and how that plays a part in the institution of policing, because it's not just about the training. It's not just about the individuals who choose to be police and where they stand, right, anti-racist or racist, how they've done their work around the way that they've internalized racism. It's not just about the laws. It's about the entire culture. It's about what it's born of.
Right. And yeah, and I think this actually makes me think a lot about like trauma and stuff like that. And I say that because people don't want to really accept the fact that these ideas and thoughts get passed down.
Yeah.
They get passed down through generations, the same way you get your eye color, your hair color, your nose size, whatever it may be. This same stuff gets passed on. These same inherited ideals, right? And so, matter of fact, this is kind of like an aside, but it fits in. Someone asked me one time, like, well, why are Black people so afraid of the police? And I thought about that. This is a couple years ago. Thought about it, and I honestly, Weeze, I didn't even realize at the time that I automatically don't trust the cops.
Yeah.
No one told me not to, right? Like, no one told me not to. And I realized, like, why is that? Because it is a similar, like, and then people are like, oh, but there are Black people who are cops. I'm like, I know that. We're not a monolith. What I mean is, right? I'm like, but collectively, like, yeah, like, why is that, right? And so you think about the origin of police and what they used to do to enslave people who are our ancestors. I think what cops used to do to my dad.
Yep.
So, and if people really wanted to understand trauma and how trauma works, you'll actually accept the fact that it's a reaction. It's a reflex, right? So that's why also, but then also people say things, right? Like, oh, but then we wouldn't have any cops who are Black or any cops who are people of color. And I just look at them. I just look at them because I'm just like, you still don't understand what I'm saying, right? And so we're in 2020. We're talking about reallocating funds, and people get so defensive about that, right? Like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, why is your first thought to call the cops?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's not when, and this is something personal about me. When I was growing up, grew up next to my grandparents, my mom's parents, and grew up on the other side of us was my mom's brother and his wife, my uncle and aunt and my cousins. And if anything ever happened at home and my parents weren't there, my parents never told us to call 911.
Yeah.
They go over to grandma's house or go to your uncle's house. It was never called the police ever. I don't remember them ever saying it. It was
a really good point.
Yeah, it was never that, and I didn't realize that. But I thought it just meant, oh, like you'll be safe at grandma's house or whatever. It was never called 911, and that hit me. To be honest with you, Weeze, girl, that hit me earlier this year. I was reading post-traumatic slave syndrome, and I was trying to keep score, right? And I was having all these thoughts, and I'm like, whoa, because my parents automatically do not trust the cops.
Yeah. I like, it's actually hitting me now as you're talking about it, because I knew that my parents had a distrust for the police, like, as I got older, but I'm like sitting here thinking back to we like explicitly were like told not. It wasn't like the conversation it didn't happen. It was like, this is our messaging was, and of course, when you're a kid, your parents are trying to teach you things without like scaring you or terrorizing you, right? So they're not going to say all of the things, but like when I think about it, the messaging I got was like, so Miss Shepherd lived next to us. She, the old lady in the neighborhood who like all the kids like took in her groceries and helped her with stuff because God love her. Anyways, and she had a son, Daniel. But it was always like, if something happens, even if somebody breaks in, whatever, or like if you're home alone, like go to Miss Shepherd's house because she was our next door neighbor, and like they, my parents and her had a arrangement, whatever. She knew clearly because they did their adult thing and talked about it.
Right.
But like, it was always go to Miss Shepherd's house, or we had another Black family also that lived across the street, and it was like, or like go to the Johnson's house. It was like, go to one of those two houses. I never, even now as a grown up, like 911 is not, I'm like processing this as you said that. Like, that's never my go-to. And obviously now as a grown up, I know why I wouldn't do that and this, that, the other. But if I think back to it, like the messaging for me as a kid was never call the police or call 911. It was literally like find an auntie or an uncle kind of thing. Or like, for me, like I didn't actually have family that lived next door, but like, community auntie and uncle, right? Like find like
Right.
elders that are neighbors, that you can like go to, and that know obviously that like, like there's that community agreement of like, if something pops off, like you and my kids show up at your door, you just take them in and then call me or whatever, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it was never, and then it was like, and if you ever come across the police, don't say anything and ask them to call your parents.
Yes. That. Yes. Yep. That's exactly right.
Like
That.
even when I turned 18, my dad would still be like, okay, now you're out and about, you're driving, like,
Mhm.
you're going back and forth to like go to school or whatever. And then it
Yeah.
was like, okay, you're 18 now, so you can't use the parents thing, but like tell them you don't want to talk to them if your lawyer isn't present.
Right.
Just like, and again, there's like, not necessarily giving us the full context, but it was just like, I'm telling you this to keep you safe. Like,
Yes.
this is what you do. And then call your parents. Damn.
Right.
Yeah, I'm like processing this out loud. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. It's
Like, it's like,
exactly.
it in your body, but it's so intentional.
It is, and it hits you hard. And but also you
Yeah.
actually said something that's really good about, like, here we are, just like met each other this year, have similar experiences, right? That speaks to Black communities, that speaks to brown communities, that speaks to indigenous communities, like what community means for us
Yeah.
collectively, right? Like that was safe, like that is our safety.
Yeah.
That has been our like safety net. And but yeah, like that's like, wow, like I think about even little things, like my dad making sure that my car was always running okay,
Yeah.
tires were always okay,
Yep.
that I never had any issues,
Or the
right?
lesson, like, did you get the like, don't ever let your gas tank go
Yeah,
below a certain
yep,
marker? Like, you always
yeah,
have to have gas in your car.
yep.
Yeah.
Because like both my parents, I mean, my dad's 75. He's
Right.
born in 1945.
Right.
Like he's seen a lot of stuff. He's
Yeah.
experienced a lot of stuff from with white people. And
Mm-hmm.
his thing is, yeah, like you don't want to get caught out with some crazy white people, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not that actual
Yeah.
language. But then also it's like he's like, you don't want to cop to stop. And
Yep.
that's the conversation that we started having when I turned 18.
Yep.
Is his fear of something happening. And I want people to also hear this. And the reason isn't just when we talk about police shooting us in the back, watching us die, right? Like laughing about it,
Mm-hmm.
putting it on us. It's also about the fact that police rape women.
Mm-hmm.
Police raped Black women,
Mm-hmm.
raped brown women,
Mm-hmm.
raped indigenous women, brutalized us.
Mm-hmm.
There are books about it. And so when we talk about white supremacy terror, we talk about civil rights movement. The movement started before Rosa Parks sat down,
Mm-hmm.
because Black women have been out here trying to fight white men, the same white men's ancestors who were the ones raping us then.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and that's uncomfortable for people to hear,
Yep.
but people need to hear it, because people need to connect those dots.
Yeah.
Right. When we talk about police, like in the history, include that, and then that brings us into different conversations about police today,
Yeah.
and defunding the police, what that means, and reallocating funds. Y'all, ain't no reason, right, why we should not have a system set up for you to be able to call someone who knows how to handle someone with a mental illness.
Oh my God. Listen,
Like, why? Don't call the like.
do you know how many social workers are underpaid and undervalued that should become part of like crisis response units?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and fine, you want to call them, you want to put them under the quote unquote police department. We need to reimagine that totally. But like that, there should be like 911 can't be a catch-all. It needs to stop being a catch-all. Stop calling 911 for everything.
Yeah,
Also,
stop.
well, I'll give you all y'all calls to action at the end. But yes, like Mario
Yeah.
told us last week, like even basic cultural competency training is optional and nobody takes it. So you really think that they're taking, if they only have 12 to 26 weeks, you really think that folks are not, police officers are not trained in this unless you are like a quote unquote good cop, like a Mario that takes every single class that he is allowed, like has access to, right?
Right.
Because he wants to do it better. But
Right.
that's not common.
No.
That's not common. And typically you see that only, and I want to make this point again, even though we made it in the last one, because you said it and it's important around like having cops with marginalized identities and having Black cops, because we as folks of color have been consistently trying to save ourselves because we know that white folks are not coming to save us. We'd like your help, please. But history
Mhm.
has shown us that we've had to fight with each other, for each other. Like we are each other's business. We got to mind each other. And so there
Yes.
are a lot of officers, such like, and as Maria said last week, that enter the force thinking, I can serve my community. Like if I'm on the inside, maybe I can make a difference. Maybe I can actually protect them. Maybe I can actually like be a true civil servant for my people, for my community, since I'm already there. Right. So that's not to, let's also like be clear. That's not to say that folks who, decide to join any sort of institution are just being like, not everybody's a Daniel J. Cameron.
Mhm.
There are a lot of like, what about Black lawyers? What about Black doctors? What about Black, judges? What are you going to say? Like, oh, you might as well just not even aspire to like, and take positions in those institutions because the institutions are morally corrupt. Then how do we change them? How about you get
Right.
off our back?
Yeah.
Y'all worried
Yeah.
about white folks and changing the system. Stop policing
Right.
Black, brown, indigenous folks
Go
when
gather
they,
your people.
right. Get your own people. Can I also say before we wrap up, because we said white men a lot. White women, you are not innocent in this.
Oh no. No, 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 no.
I've probably said this, and Lettie, I know you've heard me say it like 1,000 million times, and so I'm not going to go into the whole explanation again. But everybody go Google Caroline Bryant.
Yes. Yes.
The whole story from inception to her moment, from like the moment of her lie to just a few years ago, the moment of her finally telling the truth. I
Mhm.
want everybody to go
Mhm.
look into that. And especially right now, because, and Lettie did a great post on this, which I didn't see until this morning because shadow banning is trash, but did a great post on how literally on the anniversary of, oh my God, their names are escaping me. Huh?
Oh, J.W. Millum and Roy Bryant.
Thank you. See, this is why you are a resident historian. On the anniversary of their non-indictment, like their acquittal essentially,
Yeah.
was the exact same day that we found out that the two officers, that Mattingly and Cosgrove, were not going to be indicted, and that Hankinson was only being indicted for a bullshit wanton endangerment charge. Right? Like
Yep. Mhm. And when
history.
people go and look at Carolyn Bryant, I want them to also look at the pictures
Yes. You have.
of their faces.
Yes.
Look at Roy Bryant. Look at J.W. Millum.
Yep.
Look at the jury,
Yep.
right? Look at how happy they are.
Smoking cigars and shit.
And then admitted to Look magazine shortly after that, and they indeed
Yep.
did
Yep.
torture,
Yeah.
brutalize, murder Emmett Till.
Yeah.
And she's smiling
Yep.
and laughing.
Mm-hmm. Having a grand old time, kikiing it up.
Yep.
So we say that to say, like, we're talking about, we said white men a lot because we were specifically talking about, the evolution of the slave patrol, and that's where it started. But to be clear, white women, y'all have been used and weaponized against Black, brown, indigenous bodies, have been used as covert at, like for espionage against Black, brown, indigenous bodies, and have been weaponized against us since the slave patrol started as well. Because
Yes.
and we said this in Slave Master's Wife, or what do we call it? Slave Master's Wife to Social Influencer. Was that our webinar? Yeah. Right. Which maybe we'll re-release for y'all. Who knows?
Maybe.
They were her property. Great book that Lettie referred y'all to in that webinar. That goes through the reality and the the only thing that white women were allowed to own were Black bodies.
Yep.
Were Black humans.
Mhm.
Right? They could enslave folks. That was their only property right. So we'll do a whole nother episode on that, but I just felt like I had to make sure that I said that on this one, because what
Yeah.
I'm really tired of is well-meaning, well-intentioned white women who think that they're woke, latching on to what white men are doing to perpetuate the system so
Yep.
that they can circumvent their responsibility in it.
Right, because after enslavement, white women were out here running to be part of the Klan and to
Okay.
on the deputized white men who decided to be slave patrols.
Who do you
And
think made them snacks and sewed their hoods?
who would, I mean,
Because again, social context and history is important. At the time, men weren't sewing, so we know for a fact y'all had to make your clothes. Someone had to make your clothes, and it was white women.
there was.
Let's
Sure
be
was.
clear.
Right.
All right, Boo. Is there anything else that you're like the people got to know before we jump into our call to action?
Yeah, I mean, I just want people to to remember and understand that, like, whenever we say defund the police, stop getting so defensive with that.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, and you've done a lot of posts about this in like your captions, which if y'all don't read Weeze's captions, what are you doing? Because it's much more than just a post. Because no, I mean really, like you go in about reimagining, right?
Mm-hmm.
Public safety, what that means. We need to reimagine a country where we're not sitting here thinking first thing we need to do is call the police.
Yeah.
Right. And so that, and also I need y'all to go vote.
Listen,
I need for y'all, and I need for y'all to not vote no third party, no I'm independent, and listen. There is too much on the line.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think I'm gonna say about that, because I'm a whole other episode. We ain't gonna be here for another hour.
Listen, right?
About people not voting for the occupant of the White House.
Yeah, don't worry. We're gonna do a whole panel for that one. You'll be back. You'll be back.
I didn't send for Biden either. Now,
right? I didn't send for him, but he's here.
But he's here now. Okay, and so
we got to use the tools at our disposal. All right, y'all. So here are your calls to action for this week. 1, go watch 13th on Netflix. Okay. 2, I want you to find out who in your local area is doing work around reimagining public safety. And I want you to start following them and engage with them and see how you can support in that fight in the work that they are already doing. 3, I want you to start following Bring the Heat, which, yes, if y'all know, that is the work that I do with Pastor Ben McBride, bringtheheat.info. And then 4, I want y'all, and this is going to be your call to action every single week until November. I want y'all to make sure that you are completely read up on who is running for what position at this upcoming election, from your school board to, yes, even the president, as well as what ballot measures are on your ballot. Because, for example, there's a lot of like quote unquote tough on crime ballot measures that are coming out right now in California specifically. We have a really gross one, Prop 20. Anyways, and make sure that if you don't understand what the law is saying, that you find somebody in your area that is breaking it down, because I guarantee you somebody is. Yes. And to our previous point, these laws are written in a particular way on purpose. You could think, oh, I'm supposed to vote no, but there's one word in the way that it's written that really means you were supposed to vote yes to have the intended outcome that you wanted.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Anything else you want the people to do?
I just need people to remember too that voting is not just you voting about you. I'm really gonna need for America to understand that, like, this ain't just about you,
right?
Because it's not just about you, and remember that you don't need to vote against yourself,
right? Yeah, I tweeted last week, I need y'all to vote like Black Lives Matter is still trending.
Yep.
On that note. Thank you, Lettie. I appreciate you, Boom. And until the next time you're on.
Yes.
All right. Bye, y'all.
And now for Ask Weaves, a segment where you get to pick my brain for free.
Hello, and welcome to Ask Weaves. I actually don't even know if I'm going to keep calling it that, but that's what it is for now. So, thanks for being here.
I was curious. I was like, why is it not Ask Weaves, though?
Okay, because actually, you know what? No one else has asked that, and I'm so glad you did.
Okay.
Because a couple of months ago, when the Great White Awakening first started, white folks lost their ever loving minds and thought that access to me was like free or granted, or that they were entitled to it, and they'd hit me with the like, can I pick your brain? Can I do this? Can I do that? And I'd be like, no, look, here's a boundary. Here's another boundary. Here's another boundary. This is actually what I do as a career. So you can hire me and or join any one of my many containers that start as low as $10, right? Like all the things. And then was like, and also what I share on Instagram is a gift and you're welcome.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a choice. So from that, I had to post basically like a smooth check and was like, I am not an incubator for your feelings. I am not an incubator for your thought process. My Instagram, my DMs are not, your personal search engine. Google is free. I am not. This isn't Ask Weaves. And so I said that, and people at that time that like are old enough were like, yo, was that a play on Ask Jeeves? And
Yes,
I was
it
like,
was.
yes, it was. Well done. So yes, so it really came out of that conversation. And so I started like literally just responding to people when they'd be like, I'm just curious, like, how do you feel about, or here, let me dump my whole soul into your DM and then expect you to spend the time, energy, and emotional labor to either educate and or guide me and or hold space for me for free. No, baby, this is not Ask Weaves. Like, I don't exist for you to consume at your free will. So that's where it came from. So it's a play on Ask Jeeves. Shout out Ask Jeeves. If you are not old enough to know what that is, you can probably Google it. But yeah, that's like, I feel like that was like the OG Google before we started Googling
Text
everything.
it, yeah. Be like,
you'd go to Jeeves and be like, right. You'd ask your question, and then Jeeves the butler, and that's the other reason I named it that, because remember, like the logo was a butler. It was a butler.
Right, yeah.
Jeeves was a butler.
Honestly, I don't
he
even
was
know
an
if I remember
information
that.
butler.
Yeah.
Yeah, I for sure did, because I was like, oh no. Like, I'm not on your beck and call. Like
this is actually
like,
the problem.
So
like,
no.
what is happening right now?
Yeah, precisely. Yes, exactly. So that's why I named it that. So at least for this season, it's gonna be called
roll it out.
Ask Weaves.
I hear you.
So anyways, that was a great question, but that is not why you're here. You have a question. So hit me with it.
Just,
what's on your spirit?
BIPOC person here, and have a history of just surviving out here, to be honest. But like most of that just means like partnering with some brands that were, that I've realized now were problematic, like in big ways. You know what I mean? In the white coaching space, and so as I
white coaching space. Ciao.
So like as I know better, do better.
Yep.
Reclaim our time. Maya Angelou, that was her. Reclaim our time.
Yeah. Auntie Maxine. Sorry, I love Auntie Maxine.
Yeah. And then just Kimberly Crenshaw, of course, the intersectionality, and then Crystal Fleming calls it an invitation to intersectionality, which I really love.
Yeah.
Like, so as I start really like moving into that and like really embodying that, like how can my portfolio really reflect that?
That's a great question. When you say portfolio, do you mean those with whom you work professionally? Yeah. What is your current vetting process before you work with people?
I actually just met a woman the other day by the name of, honestly, I'm just going to shout her out because she's amazing. Her name is Diamond, and she has a podcast, and she actually helped me make
What up, Diamond?
What's up, Diamond?
I don't know Diamond, but
she's amazing.
But we're going to shout her out.
Yeah, we are. And then she helped me make a list of questions that I can really ask, like, because really, like, because I was like, you can't be like, hey, are you racist? You know what I mean? Like, that cannot be like.
I mean, you could, but they're gonna be like, no, whatever do you mean? And you're like, well, let's talk about covert racism. They're like, no, I don't wear a Klan hood, so I'm not racist. Right. Yeah. So you're not gonna get the answer asking that.
Right. Yeah. And like, so I needed to form like a list of questions. So I'm working on that, and like really, just she helped me do that. So, working on it, I guess it would be the answer to that question.
Okay. So So the way that I would approach it is one, definitely work on that, right? One of the things that I tell everybody to do, and I practice myself, is not only do I vet folks before I hire them or I choose to work with them, but I also vet folks um before I even like attach my name to them, like at all. I'm in community, if I'm even going to be in community with them. Because one of the things that I mean, I've always practiced this, I've always said this, I've said this on other podcasts prior, is that our likes, literal like digital likes, like what you're hearting, as well as who you like in real life and who you're attached to and associated with, those are votes, those are cosigns. And so I'm very, very mindful of anybody that orbits around me, right? And everybody that does orbit around me knows we have a very clear community standard and, social contracts of, look, we all operate under the presumption that Black Lives Matter, social identities are never a reason, ever a reason to discriminate, dehumanize, invalidate, erase, or oppress. That every single one of us is committed to the liberation of all folks, and that by way of liberating Black folk, we dismantle an entire system that has been created that has also been weaponized against all other folks of all other marginalized identities, right? Because Blackness was created specifically in opposition to whiteness and exists at the fringes and margins of society. And then that if at any point you do some wild fuck shit that flies in the face of those social agreements and contracts, that you're going to be called in. And so the question, like, because that's how I operate, right? My questions reflect that very specifically.
Right.
And so, yes, your questions are super important. Shout out Diamond. However she guided you to do them, do that. But before you even answer those questions or form those questions for yourself, my suggestion is get really, really clear on what type of person and what type of behavior and what type of belief systems you require out of your community. What standards do you hold yourself to? And absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, you should expect those in your community to hold those same standards. How often, as folks of color, are we told, right, our standards are too high, especially as women of color, our standards are too high. Yeah. You're too critical. What? People are dying. I don't think it's that high of a standard to say you should probably not engage in behavior or uphold policies that mean that people die. And if you think that that's too high of a standard, you let me know that we don't need to be in community with each other.
I'm with you.
Right?
Yeah.
So get really clear on that for yourself. I think we all have a sense of it, but it's profoundly different to write it out. Because then also when you get into positions where, because we do this sometimes, right? We're like, okay, we have our moral compass. We know how we feel about things and we have our expectations. And then we even ask all the questions. And the person, they answer all the questions right. And then you start to form whatever, a friendship, working relationship, romantic relationship, whatever. You enter into community with them. And now you're like, I care about you as a person. And then maybe a year down the line, they do something wild. And you're like, oh, wow, I'm really surprised by that. I wouldn't have expected that. And then they double down on their wildness, right? Because, of course, we believe in redemption culture to an extent. And so you call them in and you're like, yo, that was a problem. Here's why it was a problem. Let's reduce the harm. Let's restore the harm. And they're like, no, fuck you. And you're like, whoa, didn't see that coming. You're doubling down on the harm. Cool. We put ourselves in this really precarious situation now where we're stuck between choosing what we believe to be morally sound and right versus the relationship. Right. For me, it's very clear because I've been doing this long enough now. It's a reflexive muscle. But in the beginning, I was not exempt from, being in those moments of like, oh, but I love him. Or that's my homegirl. That's my uncle. That's my best friend. I've known them since we were 7. None of that excuses the fact that they broke a social contract that is rooted in humanizing all people. right? And so that's why I think it's super important to write down those, right, the like moral beliefs and all those other things.
Yeah.
Because then when you come to that crossroads, you can be like, all right, let me pencil, paper, okay, all right, nope, check, oh nope, very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
What they just did and the fact that they doubled down on it is in direct opposition or contradiction to, right, these set standards. I can't be in community with you.
Right.
Period. Does that make sense as like the first part of it?
Yeah, it does, for real. Yeah, like just getting those values was the word that I like, getting those values real clear and like written down on paper, black and white. Shit ain't going nowhere.
right. Yeah,
I don't go back on that. Yeah.
And then the second part of it is, then this is the harder part, especially because you said white coaching industry. Hoocha.
Born and raised.
Listen, no, I'm like the coaching anti-coaching coach. I just hate it. I'm like, don't call me that. No, that's not what I am. So I have to, like, in all fairness, name that, right?
Yeah, sorry, I did not mean to like hit a hot button.
No. Are you joking? Like, I talk about this all day long, but I just have to name it so that you know me. I'm like real transparent. I'm like, let me be clear as to why like this might sound a certain way.
Yeah, I'm with you.
You have to hunt. And you have to be ready to hunt. You're going to have to look for your people. You're going to have to look for your community. And it's not impossible, but you're definitely going to have to look for it. And one of the first ways to do it is find a person in whichever realm, like whatever. If you're looking for a, I don't know, new dog walker, whatever, right? Find somebody that you trust, that you know has the same value system as you, that you know has the same vetting, standards, and see who they're in community with. And then, engage with those people. I literally, a lot of the folks that I'm in community with have been because I've done that process, and then I see them out here and I literally am like, hi, do you want to be friends? I'm not even kidding. Like, Lettie is a perfect example. Lettie Shumate, shout out my boo Lettie. And even Maisha, right? It was like, I saw Maisha on the internet. I was like, oh, that's my kind of people. And then I saw that she said she lived in a particular part of Oakland, which is literally like a bus stop from my house. Like, we're neighbors. And I was like, I reached out to somebody that I saw was in community with them. And I was like, hey, can you introduce us? I want to be your friend.
Yeah.
And then, through being in community with Maisha, Lettie was on when we were doing those like Wednesday takeovers of Check Your Privilege. Lettie was on, and Lettie was talking about Bowen and the Panthers and history and, just Angela Day, all these people. And I was like, oh my God, she's saying all the things that I think. And I literally DM'd her and I was like, hi, do you want to be friends? Let's have a Zoom date. And she was like, okay. And we were now really good friends. And I wouldn't trade those relationships for anything. But that's literally how I did it. And we have to, that's the other part of it. That's the asterisk on it. You also have to be willing to literally say, as a full grown up, hi, do you want to be friends?
Yeah.
With no other pretense. Like, I just want to see if we vibe. I like what you're putting out in the world. Let's be homies.
That was literally me as a little girl, though. Like, that's why I laughed, because I was like, that's like my thing. Like, hey, you want to be friends? You know what I mean? Like, but like, it's gone away. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Things happen or whatever. But like, I can tap into that.
Right. I mean, that's because as adults we're told like no new friends. There's songs about it. Drake says it, so it must be true, right? Tap back into little girl you.
Yeah. For real. I'm listening. Yeah.
So that would be where I start with all of that.
All right. I can do that.
How does that feel?
Yeah, that feels good. I think confirmation in a lot of ways for real. Like, oh yeah. I'm on that road.
Yeah.
But I think just the panic of how do I make it work? Like the how part, I guess.
Yeah.
It was like, but really what you're saying is like the principle is like people are people, like people, like always the same. So
absolutely.
I'm with you.
And this sounds wild, but I don't remember, was it Field of Angels? If you build it, they will come. Like, no joke, right? If you had asked me when I mean, I've always been on this journey, right? I've always done this work in different iterations. But if you had asked me at the end of 2017, when I finally said, I'm not doing corporate anymore, I'm not doing any of this, like, I hate all of it. I hate the system. I don't want to be a part of it. I'm going to build my own business and I'm going to decolonize my business. I'm not even going to do business the way that we're all taught you're supposed to do business. That if now in 2020 I'd be where I was, I would have told you that you were lying and it was impossible. Like, I wouldn't be here, in 3 years. Like, maybe 10, 20, 30 years. Maybe, if that. But I wouldn't have been able to build the life that I've built that honors everything that I believe, down to, like, my whole goal as a child has always been, like, chase the summer, right? So build a completely digital business so that I can just never have to experience winter. I was that kid. You wanted to make friends. I just wanted to travel and be on beaches. Right. But, like, even building a business that pre-COVID, that's one of the only reasons that my business sustained COVID, because it was already fully built digitally. I mean, I had in-person stuff too, but I say that to say, like, you also have to bet on you. You have to choose you. You have to believe in you, and you have to ignore what everybody else says. And then you have to find yourself, speaking of coaches, you have to find yourself, whatever you want to call it, a coach, a mentor, a guide that has done it and that can walk the path with you. And that's the other part of it.
Yeah, because it doesn't happen outside a community, right? Like, it just doesn't.
Absolutely.
Does not work.
That part.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is more than I actually even I really, you know what I mean, was hoping for. But thank you. I hear you. I think I'm glad I take notes, because I gotta, like, go process now, you know what I mean?
Well, good thing this will be a podcast episode that you can re-listen to.
Oh, yes. And I literally forgot about that till right now.
Good. That's how I want this to feel like a conversation. So great. I'm glad you forgot.
Yeah. That was perfect.
But yeah, no, this will be forever. Well, thank you for your question. That was a really good question. I appreciate that.
Absolutely,
for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. Rate, review, subscribe, like, share this podcast with all of your peoples. Follow me on Instagram. And you can always join me in community over at Podia. Until next time.